right, you may be seated. Are there any additional matters at this time?
Very well. I would ask the court for permission for a one-question redirect of Tituba, not Tuba.
Considering the circumstances, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Tituba, I have one question for you. What did Mr. Putnam say, if anything, about the benefit of witches to Salem Village?
He said the witches were the best thing to ever happen to Salem, of course.
Nothing further.
All right, that's enough. You may step down now. Anything further for the government?
Prosecution rests.
Does the defendant wish to present evidence?
Well, Your Honor, before the defense puts on its case, we'd like to make a motion that given the lack of competent evidence put on by the prosecution, that the indictment be dismissed in its entirety and Mr. Putnam be excused with the court's deepest apologies.
You may now proceed with your evidence.
Defense calls Abigail Williams.
Ms. Williams, if you come forward and be seated.
Hi, Abigail. Can you state your name for the record, please?
Yes, my name is Abigail Williams.
Okay. And where do you live, Abigail?
I live in Salem Village.
Who do you live with?
I live with my uncle, the Reverend Paris, and his wife, and my cousin Betty Paris.
Is there anyone else in your household?
There is their slave Tituba, who you've all seen recently.
What do you know about Tituba?
Well, I know that she is a servant in my uncle and aunt's home, and I know that she is a witch, and she has led many people astray in our village.
How do you know that she's a witch?
Well, I know that she's a witch because she taught me and my cousin and our friends witchcraft and did witchcraft in front of us.
Permission to approach the witness. I'm going to show you a picture, a drawing, in fact.
Yes, this looks like some evil things that she showed us.
So this defense exhibit is a fair and accurate depiction of Tituba showing you witchcraft?
Yes, I'd say so.
Okay. What kinds of things did she show you?
Well, she showed us many evil things. She showed us divination, how to see the face of our future husbands in an egg yolk. And she showed us evil things like voodoo dolls and her evil magic.
What happened after you engaged in these games?
Well, so she presented these things to us as games first, but as we all know, they're evil practices. So because they're so evil, they caused my cousin Betty to start becoming sick, and she suffered seizures, and the devil was just afflicting her horribly, and caused her to flail around and climb chimneys and just horrible things. And then after some time, I also became sick.
What do you mean by you became sick?
Well, I suffered similar symptoms of the devil afflicting us. So my limbs contorted in awful, painful ways, and I saw horrible spirits appear to me, and I had seizures. It was terrible.
Did you seize on purpose, Abigail?
No, of course not.
Did anyone tell you to seize?
No, that would just be crazy.
Okay. What happened next?
Well, after we became sick?
Yes.
So at first we didn't realize that these things were evil, but then our friend Anne, her father, saw us playing one day, and of course we had no idea, but he became very alarmed, and he told us that these things were witchcraft. So he immediately told us we should stop doing those things, and we should make the reports to the proper authorities of this witchcraft.
And when you stopped playing those games, was that the end of the pain and the sickness?
Well, it was for a while, but then I do remember during the trial, we suffered horrible pain because Satan was afflicting us and making his witches work on us to try to get us to stop testifying against them, and they caused us to suffer horrible pain.
And by pain, what do you mean? Can you explain?
So the worst of it was that I could feel some of the witches, like Giles Corey and his wife Martha, I could feel them clawing at me from the inside and just doing horrible satanic things to us.
Now, you weren't the only one who felt these things, were you? There were other girls involved?
Yes, there was Ann Putnam, my cousin Betty, some other girls as well in the village.
Did you make up this pain that you were in?
No, I could never have made something so horrible up.
Did you think that the other girls made up their stories?
Well, no, I don't think so. It was the same thing, the same horrible things that I was suffering.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that you were acquainted with Anne's father, Thomas. Is that the man sitting over here?
Yes, a godly man.
Yes. Did Thomas Putnam ever tell you to accuse someone of being a witch?
No, of course not. He did urge us to speak God's will and to point out those who are evil in our community, but never to lie.
Did he tell you to scream and act like you were in pain or to contort in strange positions?
No, I don't think I could have pretended to do that even if he had told me.
What about the Reverend Paris? Did he ever tell you to do those things?
No, of course not. Yet again, I mean, a godly man. He would never have told us to do something like that.
Did anyone tell you ever to make up that someone was causing you pain?
No, never.
Abigail, you still believe that you felt this pain, right?
Yes,
You still believe that there were witches in Salem?
I do. Unfortunately, I mean, Satan works in evil ways, and he's never far from godly folk.
What would you say to someone who now decides that there really were never witches in Salem?
Well, I mean, like I said, Satan is constantly working on godly folks. So, I mean, it's not to say that someone might lie and now say that they don't remember being afflicted by the devil. But, I mean, the devil could be pulling the wool over someone's eyes and cause them to forget things.
Thank you, Abigail. Your witness.
Hello.
Hello.
Now, you say that you grew up with Ann Putnam and Elizabeth Paris, Mary Walcott.
Yes.
And whose house did you live in again?
I lived with the Reverend Paris and his wife.
Right. Did you know that Thomas Putnam helped Reverend Paris get his position?
No, I don't think I did.
You didn't? Did you also play with Mary Walcott?
Yes, I believe I did.
Do you know that her father, Jonathan, do you know who he's related to?
No.
Would it surprise you to know that he's Thomas Putnam's brother-in-law?
I guess not. We're not a large village. There are relations among people.
Right, so of the girls that started accusing people, Elizabeth Paris, Ann Putnam, Abigail Williams, Mary Walcott, they all came from houses intimately related to Thomas Putnam, is that right?
But yeah, I suppose so.
Does that strike you as strange?
No, why would it?
All right, so you learned games from Tituba, right? What kind of games did she teach you?
Horrible things.
She taught you how to put an egg in water,
Yes, evil witchcraft.
right? She taught you how to draw a circle with a stick on the ground.
Yeah, it was witchcraft.
Did she teach you to knock marbles out of it? Because that would be a really good game.
I don't know what you're talking about.
All right. Did she teach you to hurt people with dolls?
Yes.
Did you ever manage to hurt anyone with dolls?
Well, maybe. I don't know. Sometimes we couldn't see them, so I don't know if it really happened.
Do you think you can make it happen right now?
Well, I don't know. Are you saying that Satan is in this room and he's going to make it work? Are you a witch? He's a witch. I think he's a witch.
It's really
Oh my God,
convenient
dear
to just
God, please
accuse
protect me
anyone
against
of
these
being a
witches.
witch who's
Oh
threatening
God,
you, isn't
please,
it?
Please protect me. Oh, Jesus, please.
Are
Mrs.
you a
Williams, are you ready to
papist?
proceed?
Okay.
Do you just accuse anyone who threatens you of being a witch?
Only when they act like the devil.
So, of the original people who were the accusers in the Salem trials, Ann Putnam, she says that she was making it all up. Does that surprise you?
Well, I don't know. Not necessarily. Maybe Satan is just blinding her eyes to the truth.
And why would Satan exactly blind her eyes to the painful truth that she was responsible for the deaths of over 30 people? Do you think that's a truth she just wants to believe?
Well, Satan would love it if no one believed that he existed, because then he could do his evil and no one would stop him.
I'm sure
Godly
he
men
would
like
love
Thomas
that.
Putnam would not be able to stop him.
I'm sure he would love for everyone to believe that he was only doing God's work. Now, you grew up with Ann Putnam and learned the same games and played them with the same people. You heard the same speeches from Thomas Putnam and Reverend Parris. Is that all true?
Yes.
And now, some of the other girls are coming to grips with what they've done, but you're just the only one who can't admit that you killed people. Isn't that right?
I only killed people who were doing the work of Satan.
I'm sure you'd like to believe that. No further questions.
Brief redirect, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Abigail, prosecution asked you about a couple of girls that you know, including Ann Putnam, Mary Walcott. How about Mary Warren? Do you know Mary Warren?
Yes, I'm familiar with her.
Do you spend a lot of time with Mary?
Not particularly.
No? Why not?
Well, she seems a bit misguided.
Misguided?
Well, she doesn't seem to know what's the truth and what's not the truth.
Mary is a maid in the Proctor household, is that not correct?
Yes, I believe that's right.
Right. And you're aware that Mary made some accusations as well, correct?
Yes, yes.
So she was not only girls that are familiar with Mr. Putnam were making accusations, right?
Yes.
No further questions.
You may step down. And you may call your next witness.
Defense calls Cotton Mather.
Your Honor, I brought my own Bible. Should I swear?
We're passing on that
I
today.
always swear to tell the truth. My word is the word.
Reverend Mather, thank you for taking the time to come here today. Please state your name for the record.
I'm Cotton Mather.
Are you an educated man?
I am. I attended Harvard University and got 2 degrees there. I started attending when I was 11 and graduated with my master's when I was 19.
What's the reputation of Harvard College?
Harvard has a very good reputation. You can always tell a Harvard man.
But you can't tell him much. What did you do after graduating?
After graduation, I began to work at the second church in Boston, the North Church.
The North Church. And do you have any experience with witchcraft, Cotton?
Unfortunately, I do.
Can you tell us more?
Yes, there was a good man named John Goodwin and his children. He had 4 children, and they were afflicted with witchcraft. They were afflicted based off the witch off of Goody Ann Glover. Goody Ann Glover was a helper in the household, and she afflicted the children. I tried to save her, but I could not save her from the witchcraft.
How do you know that the children were afflicted with witchcraft?
I was able to save the children through prayer and the good word, but I was not able to save Miss Glover. There are many ways to tell someone's a witch. There are devil marks. They often confess. They see familiars, which are animals that they can control.
Okay. And what about the children that are afflicted? How could you tell that they were suffering from witchcraft?
They wouldn't be in control of themselves. It was clear that a witch was controlling them, that they couldn't make their own decisions. They would act out and have fits of rage.
So you said you treated these children, correct?
I did.
Yeah. Did you treat them because there's no such thing as witchcraft?
Witchcraft is alive and well.
And you said, you talked a little bit about how you can tell a person is a witch. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. A witch is one who writes their name in the ledger of the devil. They write their name in the ledger and they form this unholy bond with the devil. A surgeon, a trained man, a man who attended a college such as Harvard College could see, by looking at them, they could see the mark of the devil on them.
I see. And do you know anything about the Salem witch trials?
I do. I along with my father, Reverend Increase Mather, have studied the Salem witch trials. And in fact, I've written a book on them.
What's the name of that book?
Wonders of the Invisible World.
Okay. And you said you studied them. What do you mean?
We looked at the transcripts of the trials, and we spoke to people there, and we were able to determine that, in fact, the people who were convicted were witches.
Were you present at any of the trials?
I was not present at the trials.
Were you present for any of the executions?
I was present at the execution of George Burroughs, who claimed to be a minister but was not an ordained man, and he was a witch.
What happened at his execution?
At his execution, some say that if you can recite the Lord's Prayer, you are not a witch. But this man was so afflicted that the devil was in him so much, the devil taught him to say the Lord's Prayer. That confused some people, but it did not confuse myself, and it did not confuse the judicial tribunal there. And we executed him and saved the world.
Reverend Mather, did you have any knowledge of a man named Thomas Putnam before the Salem witch trials?
I did not.
Didn't know him?
No.
Did he ever tell you to take certain actions, like preventing the execution of George Burroughs from not going through?
A Harvard man and ordained minister of the North Church of Boston does not take his cue from some farmer in the wilderness.
And so you, in your expert opinion, as someone who has personally studied witchcraft and seen its affliction, what is your opinion of the Salem witch trials?
In my
I
opinion,
object, Your Honor, improper expert testimony.
I have a certificate of expertise if you would like to see it.
Can you demonstrate that his methods are reliable and peer-reviewed?
I will overrule the objection at this time.
Let me answer the question.
unfortunately, in Salem, the devil grabbed the town, and he inflicted those people. There were good people in the town who were able to take action to stop the witchcraft. But those people who were executed were witches.
Thank you. No further questions.
Hello, Mr. Mather. So you don't have any real personal knowledge besides the execution of George Burroughs about the witchcraft in Salem, is that right?
I reviewed the materials, and being the expert on witchcraft, I was able to form my expert opinion.
Since you're an expert in witchcraft, you mind if I take advantage a little bit and learn a little bit about witchcraft myself?
Absolutely.
Okay. So how can I tell if someone's a witch if they're right in front of me? I didn't go to Harvard College. I can't see the mark of the devil. Is that right?
Well, sometimes the mark of the devil is easier to see. Also, often you can gauge their intent. In our society, we look to judges for their expertise in ascertaining these matters and their good judgment and good sense.
So if a judge says someone's a witch, they're a witch.
If the due process has been met, then yes. I hold judges in very high esteem.
What if a child says someone's a witch? Does that mean they're a witch?
It means that maybe some proceedings should be initiated, as they were in Salem, within a trial, and then, if they're guilty, a conviction.
I see. And so, can you tell who is a witch and who's not from, say, hundreds of miles away?
I think that would be difficult.
And so, if all you had were court documents, say, written by one person to review, would it be very hard from 200 miles away to tell whether or not someone was a witch?
Salem is a mere dozen miles from the North Church of Boston.
That's a good point. I was under the impression that you were traveling a little bit more on the circuit, with your book tour.
As it is true that I have traveled to help other people get rid of the scourge of witchcraft, rest assured that my observations and expert opinion were based on my understanding and my father's understanding of what happened there in Salem.
As the facts were conveyed to you by the depositions written by Thomas Putnam, is that right?
In addition to the conversations I had with people in the town.
I see. And so you didn't personally see any of the people in Salem, say, sign the devil's book.
That is correct.
You didn't see any bond that they had formed or familiar spirit flying around.
I relied on the good people of Salem.
So you're here only to really tell us that there may be witches somewhere, sometime, that does something, but you don't know about what happened in Salem, except for what you've read, which we've all read.
What I read was facts. I combined them with the word and found they were witches.
Ah, so that's interesting. And you're kind of the authority on witchcraft, right? You literally wrote the book.
I literally wrote Wonders of the Invisible World along with a few other tomes.
Oh, The Invisible World. Right. I forgot what the book was called. Thanks for reminding me. It's convenient, isn't it, that all the symptoms of witchcraft are invisible?
They're not all invisible. The witch's sign is something you can see on a person. In fact, these questions make me think that maybe you yourself are inflicted with witchcraft. That maybe the devil is in this very room and we should take action.
That's the second time today I've been accused of being a witch. I'm not even wearing black. Now,
Clothing does not make a man a witch. It's the contract you sign with the devil.
now I think that it's very interesting that from a man who's accused of accusing people of witchcraft with no basis, we've had 2 such accusations from witnesses called for his defense, but that's just my observation. So,
Your testimony?
shall we continue? I would like to ask you about George Burroughs' execution.
Yes.
Now, in this book that you literally wrote on witchcraft, you say, a witch cannot suffer to say the Lord's Prayer. Is that correct?
It's correct. Using the scientific method, I was able to see that was untrue.
Now, did you know that George Burroughs was a Harvard man?
I did.
He's a bit of a new guard Puritan, right? He's not exactly part of the old system. He kind of likes to shake things up a little bit, if you will.
New guard is in the devil's guard.
Uh-huh. So he is conveniently a minister that you happen to not agree very well with. Is that right?
I practice and teach my congregation and worship with them in the way of the Lord, not in the way of the devil. So yes, there are quite a few differences between I and George Burroughs.
I see that now. And what I also see is that the rule in your book should say, a witch could not say the Lord's Prayer unless he happens to be a minister with whom I vehemently disagree. Is that a clear statement of the rule?
Unless he happens to be someone who sinned so much and became such a poor person and became so ingrained with the devil that the devil was a part of him and the devil was him and the devil gave him the power to say that prayer.
And what a world it would be to live in which all the people we disagree with are witches. No further questions.
Brief redirect, Your Honor. Reverend Mather, you mentioned before that you reviewed the trial records in the Salem witch trials.
That's correct.
Were all of the documents, all of the depositions written by one person?
They were not.
And did you have any correspondence with judges in the Salem witch trials?
I corresponded with Major Richardson.
Yes, and what did you tell him?
I wanted to warn him of the danger of falsely convicting someone as a witch. While witchcraft is very real, it's important to take pause and not blame everyone to be a witch, and only blame people who are truly witches.
And when did you write that letter?
I wrote that letter immediately before the trial.
Did anyone ask you to write that letter?
No,
You did it on your own volition.
as a man of God.
And in your expert opinion, just to be clear, you believe the Salem witch trials were just.
They convicted witches.
No further questions.
You are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Any further evidence?
We have one last witness, Your Honor. The defense calls Mr. Thomas Putnam.
Mr. Putnam, you may be seated in the witness stand.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Putnam, could you please introduce yourself to the jury, tell them your name and your occupation and where you live?
My name is Thomas Putnam. I'm a farmer, and I live in Salem Village.
Could you tell us, please, about turning back to 1692, when you first became aware of the danger of witchcraft in your town and village?
I first became aware of the acute danger of witchcraft and the influence of witches and wizards in our community in January and February, I think, of 1692. I was concerned, as any good Christian would be, of the devil's influence here in the New World, where we are attempting to build the New Jerusalem. And I was particularly distressed to find that my own daughter, as well as the children of other households, had come into contact with a woman named Tituba, who was a slave servant in the house of a minister named Reverend Parrish. We understood that she was to act essentially as a nanny of a kind, and she played with them, as one would expect. But it turned out that, in fact, she was teaching them more than simple children's games. She was teaching them witchcraft. And I concluded this because I came upon her doing so.
Can you describe what you saw, please?
Well, in particular, I saw her teaching them the art of divination. You've seen this demonstration that was given before. The glass that you see there on the table.
Yeah, so speaking of this glass, to the folks in this courtroom, on the jury, this may look somewhat benign. Can you describe what it looked like when it was in action and what the folks were doing in the room?
Well, the girls were seated around it, and they were riveted on it, almost hypnotized. They were staring at it, and the glass was swirling in the most unpleasant and evil sort of way. And the children were gazing at it, the girls were gazing at it. Tituba was making incantations and passes over it. And it was obvious that something of the deepest evil was occurring. And I broke into the room, and I seized the glass, and I took it away from them, and I asked, demanded indeed, what was happening here?
And what did they say?
Well, the girls were abashed, and I turned to Tituba as the oldest person there, and she admitted that, in fact, she was teaching them fell practices.
And did she admit anything further with respect to the witch cake?
Well, the witch cake, yes. She believed, apparently, that not only, well, it was obvious, of course, that she was a witch. Indeed, you've heard her admit to be a witch here in this courtroom. You've seen her do witchcraft. So it was no question that she was a witch, but she apparently also believed that there were other witches around and that they were afflicting these girls with whom she was consorting.
And how did she mean to prove this?
There's a thing called a witch cake, I believe, and essentially what one does is one bakes a cake containing some grain, I forget, but also the urine of the person who is being afflicted. And I believe that if you give this cake to the person who is the afflictor, they must spit it out, and if they do, then they're the witch.
And how would you have learned of this bizarre practice?
Well, Tituba told us that this was what she was doing, that she was going to make a witch's cake and test to find out who else was afflicting my daughter and these other girls.
I'd like to show, Your Excellency, if I may approach the witness, a warrant that was issued in Salem. Perhaps it can be displayed. And for those who might have some difficulty reading it, do you recognize this document?
I do. This is a warrant that was sworn out for a suspicion of witchcraft against, and I can't see.
Does it perhaps say, if you look at the print there, against Tituba and Sarah Osborne?
Yes, that's correct. And Sarah Good was also included, I think, on another warrant around the same time.
All right. And at the beginning of this text, it says, whereas Misters Joseph Hutchison, Thomas Putnam, Edward Putnam, and Thomas Preston, yeomen of Salem Village in the county of Essex, personally appeared before us being the magistrates who wrote this out, and made complaint on behalf of their majesties against Sarah Osborne, wife of Alexander Osborne of Salem Village aforesaid, and Tituba, an Indian woman servant of Mr. Samuel Parris of said place also, for suspicion of witchcraft, by them committed, and thereby much injury done to Elizabeth Parris, Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam, and Elizabeth Hubbard, all of Salem Village aforesaid, sundry times within this 2 months and lately also done, all at Salem Village. Is that a fair and accurate summary of what you indeed complained of to the magistrates?
Well, yes, not only I, of course, but the other men whom you mentioned. I was not the only complainant.
And speaking of the other men, the first man mentioned, perhaps the lead complainant or just by happenstance, is Mr. Joseph Hutchinson. Who's that?
Mr. Hutchinson is a person with whom I have had considerable dispute.
Of what sort?
Well, Mr. Hutchinson is a landowner, and he is one who I think is not perhaps as aligned with the wishes of the Lord as he might be. He had at one point, if memory serves, he had, and you will correct me if I'm wrong on this, he had in fact owned some land, and he had given land to the parish in order to build a new church.
And what did he do subsequently to donating this land?
Well, subsequently, for reasons that are difficult to divine, he became distressed, angry with other members of the parish, and he essentially fenced all around the church so that one could not gain access to it.
And when people complained to him about that, what did he say?
Something along, I can't remember his exact words, but in essence, he wanted the stones back so he could build fencing somewhere else or something like that.
And in addition to this injury, which might be said to have afflicted the whole community, is there anything he did more directly to yourself or your family? Perhaps having to do with the path of water.
That. Yes, a very important point. He actually owns a mill, and a water mill. And in order to power a water mill, one must dam water and then take the water and run the water wheel. Well, in the course of damming the stream for this mill, he flooded the land of my father and made it essentially unfarmable.
And what did your father do about it?
Well, he attempted, as any good Christian man would do, to mediate, to arrive at some sensible solution. However, this Hutchinson simply refused to be mollified, and we had to go to law.
And would it therefore be fair to say that you and Mr. Hutchinson are not friends of one another?
I think that would be the understatement of the present century.
Then how would it be the case that you could convince him to go along with making this complaint to the magistrates?
Because the evidence was so compelling.
Did you tell him of the evidence, and otherwise he did not know of it?
No, he reviewed the evidence himself. He spoke to the afflicted. He reviewed the affidavits, but he also spoke personally to the afflicted.
And did he speak to Tituba as well?
And of course he spoke to Tituba.
And upon his own opinion, joined you in making this complaint?
He did indeed.
All right. I'd like to turn now to the complaints concerning the 4 men named in the indictment being tried today. And we'll begin with Giles Corey. Do you remember the nature of his demise?
Yes.
How did he die?
Mr. Corey, I'm sorry to say, was pressed to death.
And you're sorry to say it, but perhaps it's worth mentioning that Judge Sewell suggests that he was pressed to death because of you. What would you say to that claim?
I think that is profoundly incorrect. Certainly, I was the reporter, the scrivener of an affidavit that reported statements that others had made about Mr. Corey, about the fact that he had in fact himself, as acting as a witch, had subjected another to death by pressing with stones, and I may have suggested that such a fate should perhaps occur to him.
And were you the one who imposed this sentence upon him?
Well, no, and indeed it was not a sentence of any kind.
How did he come to be pressed?
He was pressed because the law of these colonies and the law of England is such that if a man refuses to plead, by which we mean either enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, he may be compelled to plead. And one of the methods, which is acceptable under the law of both these colonies and of England, is that the man should be pressed until such time as he agrees to plead. And in this case, he was so recalcitrant that he refused to plead until he died, a process which went on for 3 days. 3 days. under the supervision of the sheriff and the magistrates of this city.
And was it you who ordered Judge Sewell to have this done?
Of course not.
Let's turn to Mr. Corey's wife, Martha Corey. Do you recall when Martha Corey was brought before the court that Giles himself testified that his wife was a witch?
I believe that to be the case.
And do you generally recall that it is often believed that if someone is found to be a witch, that their relatives tend to come under suspicion?
That sometimes happens.
Do you recall that when Martha Corey was accused of witchcraft, did she plead?
Yes,
Was there a trial?
there was indeed.
Were you the judge at that trial?
I was not the judge in any of these trials.
Did you tell anyone what to say at the trial of Martha Corey?
I did not. I had no official capacity whatsoever in any of these trials.
Did you instruct anyone to lie at these trials?
I have never instructed anyone to lie in these trials or any other. I am a man of God, and it is of the profoundest importance that all Christian men encourage, indeed insist upon, the utmost truth in all utterances, both under oath and otherwise.
Let us turn to the case of Rebecca Nurse, who to many people is a sympathetic old woman. And in a moment, I believe we'll see a recording through magic completely unrelated to divination or witchcraft of a proceeding at the trial. But do you recall after Rebecca Nurse was first charged with witchcraft, do you recall a petition that was circulated in the town?
Indeed.
I'm going to, with the court's permission, approach you and show you a copy of this petition. You recognize this document?
I do. This is a petition that was circulated by a number of members of the community who were concerned that Ms. Nurse had been, Goodwife Nurse, I should say, had been charged with witchcraft, and people did not in general believe it.
I move that this exhibit be entered as a defense exhibit.
No objection.
It's admitted.
And while I'm moving for the admission of exhibits, I'll move that the complaint that was shown earlier also be admitted into evidence.
I would hope so.
So returning to the one before us, do you see the words there at the top? We whose names are hereunto subscribed, being desired by Goodman Nurse. Who's Goodman Nurse?
Goodman Nurse is Goodwife Nurse's husband.
Being desired by Goodman Nurse to declare what we know concerning his wife's conversation for time past, we can testify to all whom it may concern that we have known her for many years, and according to our observation of her life and conversation was according to her profession, and we never had any cause or grounds to suspect her of any such thing as she is now accused of.
That's what it says.
Do you see any persons with the name Putnam among the signatories,
There are quite a number, actually.
including Jonathan Putnam
Yes,
and Rebecca Putnam?
yes.
And to be clear, that those are not Putnams who have in any way disassociated themselves from you and joined some family with you if you may have some squabble.
No, there's been a reference here to the regrettable fact that one of my uncles married a porter. That's Mr. Joseph Putnam, and he is certainly on this petition as well, but both branches of the Putnam family are well represented on this petition.
And why would people so close to you, presumably part of the vast Salem Village conspiracy to kill your enemies, sign a petition in defense of her?
Because there's no such conspiracy.
And what happened as punishment to Jonathan Putnam and Rebecca Putnam for signing this document? Were they somehow afflicted or killed?
Not to my knowledge.
And if perhaps the video is now ready concerning Rebecca Nurse, let's see what happened in the courtroom.
This is magic indeed.
Do you recall witnessing those events?
I do.
Is that video recording, or whatever it may be called, a fair and accurate representation of what occurred?
Yes, it struck me as a good deal more horrifying at the time.
I move the admission of the video as evidence, Your Excellency.
It's admitted.
Thank you. Did you recognize your daughter in that video?
I did.
Is that because your daughter was actually in the courtroom when these events occurred?
She was, as were others of the afflicted. It was quite common for when witches were on trial, the afflicted were themselves present in the courtroom. And it was quite common for them when they felt the glance of the witches to behave as you have seen here. And they testified, not to me on some document, but in front of the judges. They testified that they were feeling the pinches and the bites and the pains being inflicted by the witches. This was my daughter.
When you saw that, did you believe your daughter was genuinely suffering affliction by witches?
Of course. Would you not? To see your child in such pain, would you not do anything that you could do in order to relieve her affliction? This is all that I did. This is all that I have ever done.
And did you take matters into your own hands?
I don't know what you mean by take matters into my own hands.
Did you kill the suspected witches?
I'm sorry?
Did you kill the suspected witches?
Well, of course not. What I did is what any Christian man would do, any law-abiding man would do. I assisted the authorities, I gave information to the authorities, and the authorities took the appropriate steps to protect my daughter, the other children of this town, and the entire community from the affliction, the scourge of the devil which was visited upon us. There is no doubt. And to doubt this is to be an agent of the devil.
Let us turn to the final names mentioned in the indictment, the name of George Burroughs. Now, this is the name Deliverance Hobbs familiar to you?
You'll have to refresh my...
Well, it may not be particularly familiar to you because, as far as I know, she's neither a relative nor particularly close to your family whatsoever, but she did testify concerning Reverend Burroughs.
It may have been the case.
Do you recall that there was testimony saying that Reverend Burroughs ran black masses?
Yes.
And do you recall when your daughter had a vision of Reverend Burroughs?
I do not recall that in particular.
Would it surprise you to learn that in her vision she reported, as she reported to the court, that Reverend Burroughs said he's a conjurer that is above even witches, and that he was in charge, as it were, of the witches of Salem Village?
That I do recall.
And so, is it fair to say that both people close to you and others familiar with Reverend Burroughs' witchcraft testified against him?
Yes,
And do you recall the execution of Reverend Burroughs?
I do.
Do you recall the presence of Cotton Mather?
I do.
Do you recall the agitation of the crowd?
Yes, the crowd was understandably distressed. I think Mr. Burroughs gave a moving speech protesting his innocence in the face of the strength of the evidence. But the court had ruled. The court had given its death warrant. And there was some murmuring in the crowd, particularly when he performed this feat of saying the Lord's Prayer. But there, right there, next to the gallows, sitting on a horse, was Cotton Mather, perhaps the greatest ecclesiastical authority in all of Massachusetts, a man learned in witchcraft and all manner of the workings of the devil.
Did any of the judges object to the performance of sentence?
Of course not.
Did any of the ecclesiastical authorities, the ministers, object?
They did not.
And was the sentence indeed performed?
It was.
Now, for one brief line of questioning. Outside of Salem, there were other witchcraft accusations and executions, were there not?
Of course. The suggestion that has been made in this trial that the only persons who were accused or executed for witchcraft in the Salem area were people with whom me or my extended family had some connection is the most bald-faced lie. There were, as I believe was indicated earlier in this trial, there were over 200 persons at one time or another in jail in Salem and in surrounding villages. The suggestion that I had anything to do with even the majority of such persons is absurd and is known by everyone in this colony to be a lie.
The prosecution referenced hundreds of accusers. How many of those accusers did you tell what to speak of?
I never told anyone what to say. And I think that deserves some clarification as well. What I did was what the law requires in this colony, which is that when persons wish to give some evidence to the tribunal, to the court of oyer and terminer, they come to people who are capable of writing in a fair, round hand, as I am indeed as an educated person, though I certainly do not hold myself out to be anything like a Harvard man. But I am educated in the sense that I can write, and people come to those whom they know who can perform this service, and I and others, many others, wrote down in a fair hand summaries of witnesses, what witnesses told us. And when that was done, contrary to the suggestion here, the statements were read back to the witnesses. They were asked if they agreed with what had been written down, and that's all that I ever did.
You gave testimony in some of the witch trials, correct?
Yes.
Was that testimony at the time, did you believe it to be true?
I object to the qualification at the time. Of course it was true.
Is it true today?
When I took the stand and I raised my hand and I swore to tell the truth before God, I undertook the most solemn obligation that any man can undertake, particularly when he understands, as I did, that lives were at stake. I swore to tell the truth as I knew it then. I swore to tell the truth now as I am telling it to you now. The suggestion that anything else could be true is the basest falsehood.
Your witness, Counselor.
Mr. Putnam, you would agree with me that the path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the wickedness and tyranny of evil men.
I've never watched that movie.
Well, would you agree with me that you are your brother's keeper?
Of course.
Of course, because it says so in the Bible. And you are your brother's keeper, are you not?
So far as it is within my poor power to be so.
You heard your daughter's testimony that you are the patriarch of the Putnam family.
Yeah, she flatters me perhaps a bit, but I certainly am one of the elder males in my family, yes.
Well, if we could see the Putnam family hierarchy. There is a man named Joseph Hutchinson, who was the first man on the warrant sworn out for Tituba as a witch, who is your uncle. Is he not?
He may be my uncle, but he's certainly no friend of mine.
Well, as you are the patriarch of the family, he owes his allegiance to you.
You have a very peculiar notion of familiar relations in colonial Massachusetts, my friend. You seem to have the notion that this is some sort of French monarchy where I have the ability as a senior member of the family to tell people to go and they goeth and come and they cometh. Hardly that.
So the short answer
Because
to
if
my
that were the
question
case,
is
if
no.
that were the case,
Is that correct?
certainly we would not have been going to law with Mr. Hutchinson because he failed to allow the congregation to get into our church. If I could have solved that problem by merely saying to Hutchinson, Hutchinson, I'm the patriarch, move your wall, then I certainly would have done that without the inconvenience of a lawsuit. Do you not think?
Well, I think you have an awful lot to say to a very short question. Are you, or did he not owe you his allegiance
No.
as the patriarch?
No.
Very well. Thank you, sir. The next man on the indictment is Thomas Putnam. Oh, that's you. And the others on the indictment, other than Mr. Hutchinson, you would agree, are part of your family.
I'm sorry? The others on the indictment?
The indictment that your able counsel asked you so many questions about.
It's not an indictment.
This one here.
That's not an indictment, counsel. Please, get your legal terms correct. It's not an indictment. It's a warrant.
Very well.
Before one can get an indictment, one must have the judicial process, a process
Oh, we're
presided
gonna-
over by judges, which I am not and never have been.
We're going to get to the judicial process. I promise you.
I do hope so.
Yes. The others on the warrant, and thank you for correcting me. The others on the warrant are part of your family.
There are members of my family, extended members of my family, yes. It's a very small village.
Well, and the testimony of Ann Putnam was true, was it not? That family includes family by marriage. Is that a yes?
Oh, of course.
Thank you. Now, you wanted to teach me about the judicial process. So let me ask you this. The way that the people who were tried as witches got in front of judges to be tried was for the afflicted to first tell someone like you that they were afflicted. Correct?
In some cases, yes.
And you wrote down their testimony, correct?
If someone came to me, yes, indeed, I did.
Well, let's take Ann Putnam. She came to you, yes?
Yes.
And you wrote down her testimony.
In some cases, yes, I wrote her testimony. In other cases, other people did. But yes.
Mr. Putnam, let's stick with you. I'm interested in what you did. Ann Putnam came to you, you say, and she told you she was afflicted.
I observed she was afflicted. She didn't have
She
to tell
told
me.
you who afflicted her.
In some cases,
You
yes,
wrote it down.
Yes, accurately.
And then you transmitted what you wrote to judges to see if there would be a trial.
Yes, I did.
And so if what you wrote down was the cause of the trials, well, there's no if. What you wrote down caused the accused to be tried.
Objection.
Isn't that true?
Your Excellency, what caused them to be tried was their participation in witchcraft.
Overruled. That's what we're here for.
Well, in any case, you're procedurally incorrect, Counselor, because that's not
Can
true.
you either answer the question or not as posed?
No, I can't, because you're
Very well.
procedurally incorrect.
So let's talk about deliverance.
If you would like to tell me how the trial, if you'd like me to tell you how the trials were actually conducted and what uses were actually made of these affidavits, I'd be happy to do so. But your assumptions are completely incorrect.
Well, haven't you already told the jury that you recorded the testimony of the afflicted? Yes.
Some of them I did, yes.
Ann Putnam.
One of the ones I did, yes.
And you transmitted what you recorded to judges to review. Isn't that
To
true?
review,
And then
Counselor.
after review, the accused were tried as witches.
Yes, after intermediate procedural
And
steps in which
no
I was not
one-
involved at all, Counselor.
No one who was tried as a witch up to the time of Mistress Nurse was ever found innocent. Isn't that also true?
Of course not, because they were witches.
That's right. They
What
were
a preposterous
witches.
question, Counselor.
Now, you accused Deliverance Hobbs of being a witch on April 21st.
I may have. You'd have to show me the document.
Well, I will represent to you that that is the case.
I would not accept that representation from you, Counselor.
You needn't. And then, April 30th, you accused George Burroughs of being a witch.
He was accused of being a witch, yes.
You say you did not accuse him?
I was one of those.
Now, it's true that in a private sale, you accomplished the purchase of the Corey property.
Yes. Well, no, that's not correct. It was not a private sale.
It wasn't a public auction.
It was an auction.
It was not a public auction.
That is correct. Not everyone was invited.
And it's true what Ann Putnam testified to about Miss Good when she said, I told my father I didn't think that she was evil. That's true, isn't it?
I don't believe so, no.
No. Is
My daughter
it
said a
not
great many-
true that you told her that if she's innocent, that will be found out at trial? Is that not true either?
I might well have said that because I do believe that the judicial process would be successful in finding that out. And indeed, I have that on no lesser authority than the great Cotton Mather, who suggested precisely the same thing.
Well, Cotton Mather, the one who wrote the book that said that no witch could recite the Lord's Prayer and stood as George Burroughs indeed recited the Lord's Prayer, that Cotton Mather?
Cotton Mather, who is the greatest authority in these colonies on this question.
Well,
Are you suggesting, Counselor, that I, a mere farmer, should disagree on matters of theology and on witchcraft with the most educated and most learned man in the state of Massachusetts? Is that your suggestion?
I don't make suggestions to you, and you don't question me. I question you on cross-examination. So, Mr. Putnam, tell me how many Putnams were accused of witchcraft?
I couldn't tell you.
Would it surprise you to learn that the answer to that question is no Putnams?
No, it wouldn't surprise me.
And it's true, what Ann testified to, your feud with the Porters.
I have no feud with the Porters. Certainly we do not get along.
No, you don't get along because of your business dealings.
No, I think there you're deeply incorrect. It's not a matter of business dealings, or certainly not exclusively that.
Well, that's among the reasons you don't get along with the Porters.
I disagree with the Porters on many questions, including those of theology and those of the proper conduct of God's church.
And that's why so many of the accused who were accused of witchcraft, tried, and executed for witchcraft were Porters or of the Porter family.
No.
Isn't that true?
Absolutely not.
Do you believe in the Lord's retribution?
I'm sorry?
Do you believe in the Lord's retribution?
I think you'd have to define that rather further, Counselor.
Are you familiar with Ezekiel 25:17?
Quote it for me.
I asked you the question. Either you know or you don't know Ezekiel 25:17, Mr. Putnam.
I don't.
I'm not surprised. Nothing further.
Redirect.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Mr. Putnam, are you familiar with Israel Porter and Joseph Porter?
I am.
Is it fair to describe them as among the most important men in the Porter family?
Yes.
Were they ever accused of witchcraft?
No.
Were their wives ever accused of witchcraft?
No.
No further questions.
You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Does the defense rest?
We do, Your Excellency.
Right. At this time, I will read the instructions to the jury. You will have additional instructions in the jury room. The elements of the crime of murder in the first degree, execution based upon perjury, are that the defendant, Thomas Putnam, in the colony of Massachusetts Bay at or about the date and place charged, procured the conviction and execution of any innocent person by perjury or subornation of perjury. Those are the elements of the case. You will be given further instructions when you retire to deliberate. At this time, we will have closing argument, first by the government.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Mr. Putnam did not want to agree that the path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the wickedness of selfish and the tyranny of evil men. But we know that to be the case. And we also know that just because Mr. Putnam didn't place the rocks on Mr. Corey, crush the life out of him, we also know that because Mr. Putnam didn't actually hang anyone, does not make him innocent. Blessed is he who leads the weak through the valley of darkness. Now let us think about Ann Putnam, a 12-year-old girl who spent her time with girls of her age in the house of Reverend Paris, who Mr. Putnam procured as the Reverend of Salem Village after Mr. Burroughs left. And what did Ann hear from the Reverend Paris? And what did Ann hear from her father? Go and find the witches. Does it not strike you strange that it was only the little girls who were afflicted and no adults? Little girls who ought to have been guided by their parents, who on this earth represent the majesty of God and have the care and keeping of their souls and spirits. And at the time that Ann Putnam said to her father, "I do not believe that Mistress Nurse is evil," he did not tell her, "Well, if you don't believe she's not evil, then don't say anything." Why not? Why not? The evidence is uncontroverted that there were no Putnams amongst the accused. Excuse me. Proctors. And that the accusers, led by their patriarch, the defendant, Thomas Putnam, caused by allowing the little girls to make the accusations. It caused the deaths of 19 of their neighbors. Subornation of perjury. That means letting someone tell lies when you know they're telling lies. And I'll suggest to you that that is exactly what Thomas Putnam did. and he did it to his benefit. If you think about what he gained, including the land of Giles Corey, and having his own reverend, Mr. Parris, what he gained in power in his community. A simple farmer, how very well dressed he is, with this glittering object on his left wrist. I will strike down upon thee with great wrath and furious anger those who threaten to destroy my brothers, poison my brothers. Does it not strike you as odd that everyone accused of being a witch turned out to be a witch? Does it not strike you as odd that the little girls, including the defendant's daughter, Ann Putnam, who were planted in the house owned by Reverend Parris to listen to the conversation of the adults, their statements are recorded by this man. And it's this man who can read and write. And this man who apparently says to the little girls, "There now, did I read what you said to me? Did I write it down right?" And the little girls say to the man, "Absolutely not. They said nothing of the kind," is what they'd have you believe. We know better. And when you come to sit on your jury, you don't leave your common sense at the door. And what does common sense tell you? It tells you that a little girl in the face of a man like Thomas Putnam is not going to tell him, "No, Daddy, you got it wrong." And it's these depositions that set a series of events in motion. And if Ann Putnam didn't believe that Ms. Nurse was actually evil, it was this man's duty as a father, for the very life of her soul, to tell her then no, do not accuse. It was this man's duty to accurately reflect that information in whatever deposition he took down, but he didn't, and thereby suborned the perjury, from which you can infer that he engaged in the same conduct with every one of the little girls. Now, this interesting glass, if you don't mind, that Mr. Putnam says was on the ground, swirling. It's just a glass with water and an egg in it. You don't have to actually hold the knife to cause the injury. And just because that man didn't tell anyone to tell lies does not mean that the defendant didn't procure those lies, does not mean that the defendant didn't know they were lies when they were told. And the little girls who testified here, who told you, "I was wrong," have done so for the very salvation of their souls and have repented before you. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord our God. And that is the case. But I will ask you, the jury, to take action, to see that the Lord's vengeance is done on that man, and that you find him guilty of murder, having procured those murders by lies.
And for the defendant.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's quite important when listening to a speech in a grave matter such as this to attend not only to what is said, but to what is left unsaid. And you shall know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon you, it says in Ezekiel. And elsewhere we're told that the Lord says, vengeance is mine. To stand in the shoes of the Lord is blasphemy. Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, not yours. Do we occasionally see the wicked prosper and the evil excel, while the righteous wither like the grass? We do. We do. And we have faith that justice will be meted out in heaven. The idea that a jury on this earth should attempt to mete out the justice of the Lord is outrageous. So let us attend for the moment to the law of Massachusetts, because that we have some prayer of getting correct. There are two real possibilities with respect to the Salem witch trials, with respect to any one of them in particular. And the possibilities are fairly straightforward. Either those executed were guilty, that is, they were witches, or they were not, that is, they were innocent of the crime charged. In neither of those scenarios is Thomas Putnam guilty of any crime. Now let's begin with the more likely of the two scenarios, which is that the witches indeed were guilty. You have heard the testimony. The governor, appointed by their majesties, William and Mary, picked top judges, judges with experience, with education. He sent them from the capital to our village. He instructed them to use the law of England and this colony. And they conducted trials in open court. No star chamber like the old days in England. No inquisition with witnesses tortured into confessing. No, all witnesses sworn, all presenting their testimony in open court. And were all of them convicted? No. Think about what was unsaid. We're told that Thomas Putnam procured these convictions, but of course not all were convicted. This was no sham process in which no one had a prayer of acquittal if they were indeed not guilty. The testimony given was that which is standard in these sorts of proceedings. Cotton Mather, Harvard-trained expert on religion, said one should be careful. Do not be too quick to adjudge guilt, but also consider the evidence. Confessions are quite probative. Many confessed. Others were found with other evidence, such as spectral evidence, which, again, the learned reverend said should not be given too much weight, but might well be considered. Samuel Sewell, the judge, who now regrets his role in the process, accepted that. He, too, trained in judicial practice. He with experience as a judge in Boston before he came out to help us. He heard the witnesses. So, for example, when Reverend, as it were, Burroughs was to be executed, and he made a pretty speech, did he stop the execution? No, the judge did not. He wrote down in his diary that people who didn't understand were confused by the speech. But folks like Cotton Mather and the judge, like those on the jury, 12 men, good and true, chosen from this community, knew that he was guilty and that the sentence was righteous altogether. What evidence did we see? What was unsaid? The little girls, we're told. The little girls who all lived in Mr. Putnam's kitchen, apparently. Some of the accusers were adults. Others of the accusers who were young were not under any sway of Mr. Putnam. So Mary Warrant, for example, who turned on her own father figure. Mr. Proctor, who took her in when she was an orphan and gave her work as a servant and looked after her and fed her like his own child. When she began making claims that he did not think were appropriate, she was whipped. But then in court, when told to tell the truth, she gave evidence and convictions were obtained. What should Thomas Putnam have done? Jumped in front of the judges to prevent them from doing their work? Stood up and chastised Reverend Mather when he showed up on horseback at the end? Or Increase Mather, the father of Cotton Mather and president of Harvard College, who himself has written in quite diligent and voluminous detail about the unseen world. The unseen world that the Bible tells us is as real as what we can see and touch and feel. Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. In the interpretation of earthly statutes passed by human legislators, it is understood that we should not, unless absolutely necessary, read the words to be surplusage. We figure all the words are put there for a reason. How much more so for the Word of God? Does God write commandments for his amusement or to guide the conduct of his people? Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. When you go into the new land which God has given you, you will have no witches, have no wizards, have no divination. For a long time we interpreted that land to refer to the Holy Land. But of course, this land is another one that God has given us to plant true religion, to bring Christianity to the heathen people who heretofore have lived on this continent, to build the New Jerusalem, a shining city on the hill, and so many biblical laws are enshrined in the earthly statutes that govern our lives. The folks convicted were guilty. But let us give the utmost charity to the prosecution's case and assume, for the sake of argument, that at least some of them, perhaps all four of them mentioned in the indictment, were innocent. That indeed the folks in Salem could have said to the peoples of other towns, if you're having spectral problems, I feel bad for you, son. We've got 99 problems, but a witch ain't one. Let us imagine that happy fantasy. Who is responsible for those errors, for the executions of innocent men and women? I would say the first people to look for, were we in the mood, are the prosecution's witnesses. Samuel Sewell comes back from Boston to tell you that he negligently supervised a miscarriage of justice. Sorry about the kangaroo court, folks. I'm back to make money in Boston. Whoops. I don't see that man charged with any crime. Tituba comes forward, and as she did in Salem, confesses before you all to practices that are clearly witchcraft. I don't see her charged with any crime. Yes, the sheriff chased her down and made her answer some questions, but she was not charged with any crime. Even at Salem, she was not executed. Perhaps she should have been. Perhaps. It's not for me to say. But she wasn't. And here, the prosecution says, on behalf of the colony, she's the kind of woman we'd like you to trust. This confessed witch. And then we hear from Mary Warren, whose testimony deserves the credit that you all gave when she was speaking, a confessed liar. She herself says, I called my master, Proctor, a wizard, a witch, when he was not. And is she charged with procuring this death through some sort of perjury? No, but she is a perjurer, at least if she can be believed. And if she can't be believed, then she's a perjurer. Those apparently are the best witnesses they have. Well, they have two others, in fairness. They have a handwriting expert who will swear that in his expert opinion, documents that Thomas Putnam admits he wrote and says he would happily write again if the situation were to arise, because it is his duty as a subject of the crown and a Christian and a father and a husband to protect the people of his residence. Yes, the expert says he wrote the documents that he wrote. All right? And that leaves little Ann Putnam. For once, we actually have a little girl. Or at least we used to. Perhaps when she was 12 years old, she was indeed mistaken. That she indeed accused people of witchcraft who were not witches. Only our heavenly judge knows ultimately the truth. Reverend Mather suggested that innocent folks could never be convicted. I wish I could share his confidence in our system of justice, but I fully share his confidence that all of us receive the appropriate reward in heaven. And so any errors that were done can be rectified by our ultimate judge. Perhaps Ann Putnam was mistaken, but even now, she testified that she spoke no lie. Pressed, you lie, she says, it was no lie. In other words, she believed it. Now she thinks now that it's embarrassing and she can't find a husband and the community is somewhat ashamed of what seems to have happened a few years ago, and they're looked upon by the rest of New England as a bit of a joke, and she perhaps the jokiest joke of them all, having testified indeed against 60 people, that maybe she was erroneous. It could even be true. But her father had every right in believing her. You all saw the video. Could that be faked? Surely not. Surely there are no actresses on this earth capable of giving so realistic a performance. And Mr. Putnam, how much more affected would he be by it than you, seeing that it was his own daughter, that his own wife was afflicted, that he had to take his wife out of the courtroom. And he did what he was supposed to do. He turned it over to the authorities, who conducted the trial that they're supposed to conduct. And now, in a bit of a red-faced shame, the people of Massachusetts say, we messed up. But they don't want to say that. They want to say, he messed up. In ancient Israel and temple days, the high priest would take 2 goats and slaughter one as a sacrifice to the Lord, and on the other he would put the sins of the people and send it out to Azazel to carry the sins away. Well, the temple is destroyed, and that practice is gone. Yet it would seem that new scapegoats are always being looked for. And this man is the one that is being offered to you. Kill this man, and the rest of us can say we did no evil. The devil walked among us in one man. Well, this man must have been a quick mover, getting 200 people accused in towns in which he never visited, accused by people he never knew, who have no connection to his family. Again, we return to the unsaid. Oh, the 30 charges. Yes, if you pick the 30 charges that involve his family, it looks like all the charges involve his family. And all the documents that he wrote were written by him. What awesome power does a yeoman farmer in Salem Village have to turn people in other cities against their parents, to turn ministers of the gospel erroneous, to turn judges incompetent? What sort of conspiracy is being suggested, and is it plausible? You were charged not to forget your common sense. For once, the prosecution has offered you good advice. Is Thomas Putnam capable of the elaborate, secretive conspiracy with which he has been charged? Samuel Sewell says, we didn't do a good job. The other 8 judges do not say so. The ministers continue to believe in the righteousness of the judgments. Maybe they are wrong, but are they wrong in a way that this man should have known before and put a stop to it when no one else in the village could? There are some who believe the executed were witches. Maybe so. But even if not, this man is no murderer. If we messed up once, let us not add additional blood guilt to the judgment that will be read in heaven against this town. Enough, enough, enough is enough. Please return the verdict commanded by the evidence. Not guilty on all counts. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency.
All right, at this time, we will be in recess and retire for the jury to deliberate. Please stand for the jury.
You guys come on up. My understanding is delivery.
Yep.
On front of everybody.
Yep. Love using the mic.
Are you going to read the instructions to us now? Sorry.
I already read the instructions to you.
Okay. There's another set there. Okay. Do we have 12? I thought you guys were going to come up so we'd have 12. No, Cotton, you can't come up. Okay, first thing I want to do is to take an informal vote of the jury, and we'll just vote not guilty first. Everybody for not guilty right now. So we're not unanimous. So now, need to poll you guys to see why you're voting the other way, or why you're voting not guilty.
I'm just surprised this isn't happening in private, okay? I always thought there should be more transparency to the jury process. I don't think that the state proved anything more than speculation.
If the glove don't fit.
They didn't make their case against him.
Not enough evidence.
I just say reasonable doubt. They're the handwriting expert, the judge. Too many doubts for me.
Well, I think that the prosecutor, when he said, don't leave your common sense at the door, I think there's overwhelming evidence. He had too much to gain. He manipulated the trial, and especially I think the evidence report given by his daughter. I think clearly, did he intend for it to go this way? I don't know, but I think he set the wheels in motion, and he's certainly guilty of that.
So it looked like to me that there was likely conspiracy here, maybe, but our job is to judge him beyond a reasonable doubt. That's not beyond no doubt, but it is beyond a reasonable doubt. So the standard is if you have doubt left in your mind, you can't convict him, even if you think maybe he might have done this. So once again, we're going to need to take a vote and hopefully get unanimous this time. Everybody for not guilty. Thank you. Not guilty. We had to get unanimous so we can get off the stage.
All right, foreman of the jury, is it correct that you had a unanimous verdict of not guilty?
That is correct. We had a unanimous verdict of not guilty.
The defendant is released from custody.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Court is in recess.
Look soon for Mr. Putnam's upcoming book, If I Did It.